Cheating wife and her friend tried to trick me, but I caught them red-handed. Cheating story. When I was young and careless, I used to drink a lot. I don't know how I never got stopped, because there were many nights when I ended up in the parking lot of my apartment complex without knowing how I got there. One night, I got so drunk that I fell onto the railway track while trying to get back to my car. I tried to get up but couldn't keep my balance and just fell between the wooden ties and stones like a flopping fish. As I was thinking about just lying there and sleeping, a bright light suddenly hit me and I heard a train's whistle. I looked up and saw a huge train coming right at me. In a panic, I tried over and over to get up but couldn't. Eventually, I managed to crawl away about 10 seconds before the train's wheels would have crushed me. Later that night, when I sobered up, I promised myself I would never get drunk again. I didn't join any support groups or quit drinking completely. Instead, I started drinking responsibly. I never got drunk again, didn't even come close. When hanging out with friends, I'd have 1 or 2 beers all night, and on dates maybe a glass of wine. That's still how I am today. It's been over 10 years since I last got really drunk. So one evening, I was surprised when my wife Cora and our friends Brad and Susie Cunningham seemed to be trying to get me drunk. I suspected they had made some kind of bet. Someone was holding bets that they could get me drunk, while others were betting against them. I hope my wife was the last one. A little extra money wouldn't hurt us. The evening started quite normally. 2 days before that, Cora told me she had invited the Cunninghams for dinner. I wouldn't call them our best friends, but we had known each other for a few years and met from time to time. Cora and I were still in the kitchen when she saw the lights of their car hitting the panoramic window in the living room as they pulled onto the driveway. "Honey, could you take the roast out of the oven while I go greet them?" Cora asked, untying her apron. "Of course, dear. You go greet them, and I'll be there in a minute," I said, putting on oven mitts and hearing the usual exchange of greetings echoing from the hallway. As I pulled the roaster out of the oven and placed it on the stove, I checked if everything was ready. I was already heading towards the lively trio when everything unexpectedly went silent. As I turned the corner, I thought I caught whispers among them. Of course, I had no reason to be suspicious yet. Hey, no secrets in this house," I joked. My cheerful comment seemed to catch them all off guard. "Hello, old man," Brad replied, taking a step back first. "Hello, Steve," Susie chimed in. Before I could respond to her husband, she extended her hand and kissed my cheek as Cora hung their coats in the hallway closet. "Hey, what's a guy got to do to get a drink around here?" Brad interjected as we shook hands. Now I was a bit puzzled. We had barely exchanged greetings and he was already pressing me to drink. I started wondering if they had any ulterior motives before they came over. "Just follow me," I replied. They all followed me into the study and took their seats while I played the role of host and prepared drinks. I handed Cora and Susie a glass of white wine. Brad was a versus vodka and martini enthusiast. I didn't need to ask if he would ever change his drink. I'd have been shocked if he did. I opened my light beer and then started talking to Brad about his martini. "Why don't you make one for yourself and join us?" he suggested. "No, I'll stick with my beer," I replied. "Beer," he muttered. "You're no fun. Come on, Steve, be a man tonight. Make yourself a real drink," he said, raising his martini. To show what he meant, to my surprise, Kay joined in. "Yes, dear. I don't think I've ever seen you with anything but beer. Why not join Brad?" I looked at my wife in astonishment. We had never really talked about why I don't drink much. I wasn't proud of how I used to be, broken. Unlike some, I never considered drunkenness a major achievement in life, so though I never discussed it with Cora, I didn't try to hide it from her. It just never came up in conversation. However, after 7 years of marriage, one could assume she knew that I didn't drink to get drunk. Her comment was my first hint that something was going on. Whatever it was, it must have been what they whispered about when they first came in. It meant that all 3 of them were involved in it. My mind immediately shifted to detective mode. What could they be planning? It must be related to my drinking, or lack thereof. I came to the only conclusion that made sense to me: money. Since no one had ever seen me drunk before, I was sure Brad boasted that he could get me to drink, and Cora probably agreed with him that he couldn't. But why did she encourage me to drink? Maybe she just wanted to make sure Brad and Susie couldn't accuse her of cheating when it came time to settle, or perhaps Susie made a bet in my favor. "Maybe later," I said. Everything felt so strange. I needed time to figure it all out. I started to really doubt that my wife was on my side when she tried to give me another beer before I even finished the first. I decided the only way to understand what was happening was to play along. But how? I couldn't just pour my beer down the drain and pretend I drank it. That would be too obvious. So, I came up with a plan. After dinner, we all moved to the living room. Another martini, Brad? I asked. You know what, I might join you. I'll make myself one, he replied. I watched closely as they exchanged glances and chuckled. That's when I suspected that maybe they were all trying to get me D and K just to see if they could. That was all I could think of. Well, the joke would be on them. I planned to play along until the end. While everyone chatted and ignored me, I prepared 2 pitchers, one with martinis and the other with lemon water. If I poured it into a martini glass and dropped an olive into it, no one would know. I placed the martini pitcher on the counter and the other on a shelf behind the counter. As long as no one saw me pouring them, I was in the clear. I poured another glass of white wine for each of the ladies, then returned to the martinis. As I handed Brad his glass, I felt the eyes of everyone present on me. When I took a sip, I wanted to immediately start acting D and K, but clearly, they'd never fall for that. So, I had to maintain composure and allow myself to slowly get. It didn't take long to finish my glass. I stood up and walked over to the bar. Brad, another one? No thanks, Steve. I still have a bit left, but you go ahead, he replied. Making sure no one was watching, I poured more lemon water, added an olive, and rejoined the group. I didn't want it to be obvious, so I took a bit more time with it. After another 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, Cora asked for more white wine. Yes, me too, Susie chimed in. You could make another round for everyone, Steve, Brad added. Once again, I spilled drinks all over the place. Up to this point, I had only had 1 B.R, but everyone thought I had D and K 3 martinis. In addition to that, it was time to start showing some effects. I intentionally began speaking a bit slower, even pausing a couple of times to gather my thoughts. Over the next hour, I had 2 more drinks compared to everyone else's 1. By then, I allowed my eyelids to droop and muttered my speech incoherently for several minutes. I just sat quietly, nodding my head to make it believable. I struggled to my feet. Swaying, I walked over to the bar and poured myself another drink. Then, I staggered back and flopped down on a chair. I finished it in 3 gulps, closed my eyes, and let my chin fall onto my chest. I stayed like that. The first thing I heard was Sus' voice asking, "Did he fall asleep?" Cora began shaking me by the shoulder. "Dear, are you alright?" I heard Brad say, "He's out like a light." I knew I could get him D and K under the table. Cora responded, "Oh, I'm not sure this will work, Brad." "Of course it will work, darling. When he wakes up tomorrow thinking we had making love together, he'll feel incredibly guilty. You know him. He will be devastated." What the? This didn't sound like any bet to me. I sat perfectly still and listened. Cora said, "That's the point, Susie. I just can't do that to him." "Come on, Cora." I heard Brad's voice again. "You can't back out now after all this." "No way." "Yes, Cora, come on." So far, the plan has worked perfectly. Later tonight, we'll take some of Brad's juice and smear it all over Steve's tool. He'll never know it wasn't his. He will be fully convinced we had making love. Once he thinks we've already slept together, Brad is sure he can persuade him to swing again, only next time when he's sober. We've talked about this, Cora. Yes, I know, but talking about it and actually doing it are 2 different things. All right. The only decision I had to make was whether I wanted to fight for my marriage or kick Cora to the curb. Her voice sounded like she was backing down. I could have given her the benefit of the doubt, simply opened my eyes, and stopped everything in its tracks. The problem was that I always wondered whether she would actually go through with it. This lingering question would haunt me to my death, so I decided to pretend a bit longer and see what she was going to do. If she decided to go further, I would throw her out along with the other 2. I noticed someone getting up from the couch, and then I heard Brad's voice. "Let's take him upstairs. I'll grab his shoulders, Susie, you take his legs. Come on, Cora, help us." Brad grabbed me under the armpits. I was about to put an end to this when Cora's panicked voice gave me new hope. "Stop. No, I can't do this. I must have been insane to agree to this, Cora. No, Brad. No, I'm not going to cheat on Steve. He's a good husband. I love him, and I'm not going to risk losing him." "Cora, you won't lose him," Susie countered. "He can't blame you for sleeping with Brad if he thinks he slept with me." "I don't care," Cora responded firmly. "I don't care. I won't allow it. I think you guys had better leave." Brad started to argue. "Dmn it, Cora, Kay said, "Leave now. Get out of my house, you freak, and take your beast of a wife with you," I shouted, jumping up from the couch, surprising everyone. "And never come back here or speak to me or Cora again." "Oh my God," Cora exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hand. All 3 of them nearly jumped out of their skins. Brad thought he could talk his way out of it. We were just joking, man. We knew you were pretending, Brad. If you don't get out of this house by the time I count to 3, I swear we're going to have it out. 1. Okay, let's go, Susie. I looked at my wife, tears streaming down her cheeks. If you want to go with them, go right now. You can sleep with dear old Brad anytime you want, I growled. No, she said, shaking her head. Please, Steve, forgive me. I am so sorry. I would never have gone through with it. But you did talk about it, didn't you? She knew I had heard every word and couldn't deny it. She just looked at me, pleading for mercy with her tearful eyes. Have you already had making love with them? No, never, I swear, she exclaimed resolutely. I stood for a few seconds, looking at her. Her entire body was literally trembling. If I hadn't overheard their conversation, I wouldn't have believed her. But from what I heard, it sounded like this was their first encounter. I still hadn't decided whether our marriage would continue or not. What was so important about swapping partners with them? Do you have feelings for Brad? No, not at all. It's one time, Susie and I were talking, and the conversation somehow evolved. The next thing I remember, she said that Brad was talking about swapping partners, and you agreed to it, I stated. Well, not right away, I said. You would never agree to it. Then Brad came up with this plan. Susie and I talked about it a few more times. It seems like every time we meet, we only talk about this. So, it's Susie you want to have making love with? Susie? No, Steve, it's not like that. What then? I asked, raising my voice. I'm trying to understand what the HLL could have made you go through with this. I saw her face contort in response to the direct question. I had to tell you, Cora. Right now, I'm struggling to keep this marriage alive. You can't even imagine how much you've let me down tonight. I keep asking myself how a wife who claims to love her husband could scheme and plot behind his back like this. You said it yourself, if your plan had worked, I would have been devastated, thinking that I had betrayed you. This isn't something you just realized tonight. It's something you've known all along while planning your little dirty betrayal. This is what you were counting on, regardless of the circumstances. You knew how guilty I would feel, and you were planning to use that guilt against me. Cora burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. I'm not made of stone. As angry and hurt as I was, it brought me no pleasure to see you like this. Part of me wanted to hold her and comfort her, but most of me saw her pain as a small measure of justice. I didn't intend to hug her, but I also didn't want to stand there and watch her cry, so I turned around, went back to the kitchen, and grabbed a B.R. from the fridge. It took a good 10, maybe 15 minutes before Cora pulled herself together and joined me at the kitchen table. She had washed her face in the bathroom sink and held a crumpled napkin in her hand. She lifted her head and looked at me from across the table. It seemed like she wanted to say something but just couldn't find the words. I waited a few moments, but I had questions that needed answers, so when it didn't seem like she was going to offer anything voluntarily, I started again. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think about your answer before you just blurt it out. She dabbed her eye with a napkin and nodded. Do you still love me? I mean, like you used to. Do you still love me as much as when we first got married, or have you lost that? I don't need to think, Steve. Yes, I still love you just as much as when we first got married, maybe even more. Then why, Cora? I guess I never really thought we would actually do anything. It was just like a fantasy, something naughty, perverted, fun to think about and talk about. When Brad said he could get you D.N.K., I remember thinking, yeah, that'll be the day. In all the time I've known you, I've never seen you D.N.K. When Brad came up with his plan, the three of us talked. It was thrilling, but deep down, I knew it would never happen. Then why did you try so hard to make it happen? You almost dared me to have a martini with Brad. You tried to get me another B.R. during dinner. You looked like you were trying to make it happen. I know what I did. I don't know. Maybe some part of me wanted to see if we could actually do it, but I would never have gone through with it, Steve. Honestly, when it hit me what we were actually going to do, I couldn't. I would never treat you that way. You have to believe that, Steve. I really love you. I could never cause you such pain, she sobbed. I think the pain of the betrayal almost blocked that part of my mind. She didn't go through with it. When it came down to it, she backed out. That's the only reason I haven't walked out the door yet. So I guess I've come full circle. I was faced with the same decision as an hour ago. I needed to think, maybe talk to someone. This could very well be the most important decision of my life. Cora, I think we need a couple days away from each other. I'm going to stay in a motel where I can be alone and think. Steve, please don't do this. I'll give you some space. I'll keep quiet and won't bother you. But I need you to be with me. No, I need time to really look at our marriage. I just can't believe that a truly loving spouse would go behind her husband's back and plan something like this. You said it was fun and thrilling. That concerns me, Cora. Even if you didn't go through with it, how can it be fun to plan such a betrayal against someone you love? No, I'm not buying it. I tried to put myself in your place. I would never think of hurting you. Even if I wasn't planning on going through with it, it wouldn't give me any pleasure to make a plan behind your back, and I certainly wouldn't find it amusing. Cora was crying so hard that I wasn't sure she even heard me. I needed to get out of there. I gathered some things and came back to the kitchen with a suitcase. She was trying her best not to cry again. I think she wanted to try to persuade me to stay one more time, but I wasn't going to give her that chance. I told Cora that I would call her in a day or two and left. I planned to stay in one of the nearby motels, but as I headed towards them, another thought occurred to me. I was from a small town in Indiana, about 80 miles from where I now lived. My mom had passed away a couple of years ago, but my dad still lived in the house where I grew up. I always considered him a pretty smart guy. I changed my route and steered the car towards the highway. Even with light traffic, the winding back roads of Indiana slowed me down. I was so preoccupied with my own problems that I hadn't even thought about the time. When I pulled into my dad's driveway, there were no lights on in the house. I took out my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't sure what to do and I had almost decided to sleep in the car until morning when I saw the lights turn on. A few minutes later, the porch light came on. By the time I got to the door, he had already opened it. "Son," he said, astonished, "what's going on? Is someone hurt, Cora?" "No, not exactly, Dad. She's physically fine, but, well, we've had some problems. I wanted to talk to you, but I'm really tired. Is it okay if I stay here tonight?" "Of course," he replied. "You know where everything is." We both went to sleep. I hadn't realized how tired I was between the stress and the long drive. It seemed I fell asleep before my head even touched the pillow. The first thing I remembered after lying down was the smell of fresh coffee the next morning. Dad had already showered and dressed by the time I followed my nose to the kitchen. He was waiting for me with breakfast. I stumbled over to the counter, grabbed a cup from the cupboard, and poured myself some of the Colombian drink before joining him. "Dad, how did you know I arrived here late last night?" It was kind of eerie. We've been having some trouble with the neighborhood kids. They've been shooting at cars and houses with a shotgun. I guess I was sleeping with one ear open and didn't even realize it. I heard you pull up even before you turned off the engine. I just shook my head. As long as I can remember, there has always been a gang of local troublemakers causing some sort of nuisance. Of course, there was a time when I probably counted as one of them. Are you ready to tell me why my son ended up on my driveway at 2 o'clock in the morning? That was my father, straight to the point. I nodded and took a sip of the black gold. Cora and a couple of friends tried to pull something on me that. "I just can't believe she would do something like that," he said, saying nothing, just waited for me to continue. "She and another married couple. We know, tried to get me D.N.K. The plan was to make me think I had making love with another woman. I assumed they were going to use that to convince me to swap wives." "Was this something Cora agreed to?" he probed. I sat down and told my father the whole story. How I first thought it was a bet, how I faked passing out, why Cora said she did what she did, all of it. "So, Cora really thought you'd blacked out when she announced the end of everything?" "Yes, I have no doubt she truly thought I was D.N.K. I put on a good show." "Well, I can certainly see your disappointment in her," he said with a sigh. "What are you planning to do?" "I don't know. That's why I came here to talk to you. It's just so hard for me to believe that she would find any pleasure in setting up a plot against me like that. I guess I'm wondering if someone who really loves you could actually do that." I almost saw the gears turning in his head as Dad stood up and poured himself another cup of coffee. He was still pondering when he returned and sat down again. "Has she ever done anything like this before?" "No, this was completely unexpected. As far as you know, she has never been unfaithful, right?" "That's right, you know me, Dad. I believe in loyalty. I would never tolerate deceit." He was still thinking. "Do you have any idea how many times in life you've been given a second chance, son?" "So, you think I should give her a second chance?" He took a sip of his freshly poured drink. "People aren't perfect, Steve. We all have our flaws. I remember when you were younger, your mother and I were so worried about your drinking. We talked to you about it a couple of times, but it didn't seem to help. Every now and then, we would get calls from friends or neighbors who had seen you so D.N.K. that you could barely walk. Your mother and I felt so helpless. But you were old enough to be responsible for your actions, and we couldn't just lock you in your room. We were sure you would end up either in jail or in a funeral home. But you didn't, either one. Day, it seemed like you just straightened out. For your mother and me, it was nothing short of a miracle. I have no idea what happened that completely turned your life around, but I suspect it had something to do with a second chance. Now, of course, a second chance doesn't always work out. Some people let it pass by without taking any advantage of it. Others, like you, use it to change their lives. It depends on the person too. Determine what happens next. Unfortunately, not everyone gets a second chance. What a pity. I think everyone should have that chance. If they mess up, then they're responsible for what happens next. But I wonder how much better the world would be if everyone got another shot. I sat there, remembering that night on the tracks. I still felt the fear I felt when I looked up and saw my imminent death coming towards me. I wonder if Cora felt the same fear when she saw our marriage falling apart. Would it scare her as much as it scared me? How long will you be staying, son? My father interrupted my thoughts. Well, I was planning to stay for the weekend, but now I think it's about time I headed back home, Dad. I hope you don't mind. Not at all, he replied with a smile. We sat and talked about other things for a while. Later on, I helped him with some yard work. But I returned home the same day. I kept thinking about what my dad said about a second chance. If she hadn't spoken up when she did and put an end to it, I wouldn't even be considering it. But she did. However, it will take some time before I fully trust her again. Until then, I'll remain vigilant. When I walked in, I was surprised to hear music playing from the office. There she was, sitting at home alone and crying, just like I had pictured. I startled her when I appeared in the doorway. She looked up, and I saw her catch her breath. I wasn't sure what I expected to see. Maybe the music confused me. She was standing behind the ironing board, ironing one of my shirts, and had hung up 4 or 5 more. What the HLL? I said, confused. I was going crazy here all alone. I didn't know when you would come home, or if you would come home at all, she said with sadness in her voice. I had to do something to try to distract myself. Music helped, but no, I felt closer to you by ironing some of your shirts. She looked at me expectantly. She was waiting for me to pronounce the fate of our marriage. The anxiety on her face was hard to miss. I saw her literally hold her breath. I can't express how disappointed I am in you that you could find this exciting or find any pleasure in plotting against me in any way. Just makes me cringe, Steve. I'm so sorry. I know you're apologizing, I know, I said, cutting her off. I didn't need any more apologies. We never really discussed what we expect from each other regarding fidelity. I didn't think we needed to. I always assumed you felt the same as I do. Now, I wonder if you might take a more casual approach to this topic than I do. I spent the night with my father. He asked me a question, which I answered immediately as far as I knew. But on the way home, I began to question it. You see, that's the problem with opening Pandora's box, Cora. It's like a judge who once took a bribe and got caught. Every decision he ever made is then called into question. People suspect that other decisions he made in the past could have been influenced by other bribes. My father asked if you had ever been unfaithful to me. I said no, but now I'm not so sure. Never, she asserted decisively. Steve, I have never done anything with another man that I wouldn't do in front of you, I swear. I'll swear on the Bible in front of our pastor. I'll swear. I'll take a lie detector test. I'll do anything you suggest. Okay, a lie detector test is a possibility. I need some time to think about it. Meanwhile, our marriage is in a very uncertain place, Cora. I've lost not just trust but also respect for you. It's going to be up to you to earn them back if you want our marriage to continue. Do you? Now she was crying again. Do you mean, do I want this to continue? Yes, of course, I do, Steve. I promise I'll never do anything like this again. You're not the only one who's lost respect. I've lost respect for myself too. Alright then, consider this a second chance at a happy marriage. There won't be a third, so I hope you do everything you can. I will, Steve, she said. And she did. She worked hard to regain my trust and respect. Some of us are lucky enough to face the unexpected consequences of our actions and get a second chance. Cora is another. Brad and Susie were less fortunate. 7 months after our incident, I heard they were getting divorced. I don't know why, and I don't care. Neither Cora nor I have ever spoken to them again. Second story. Boyfriend cheating with my friend. I've been with my partner for 5 years. At first, he was really dedicated to me and I thought he felt the same way. One evening while he was drinking, he blurted out that my friend contacted him to fix something for her and they've been talking ever since. He added that she's such a good person. We ended up arguing because I asked him how someone can be good if they're going behind their friend's back and pretending nothing happened. If she really needed something done at her place, why didn't she tell me? When I confronted him the next day, he said he couldn't remember clearly but apologized for making me feel that way. In my heart, I knew something wasn't right, but I decided to let it go. The problem is, his actions match what he told me. He's never available, he never messages me when my friend and I are together, he doesn't call me like he used to, and I feel disrespected, like he'll only talk to me when it's convenient for him. It's getting worse. On top of this, my friend told me she thinks our relationship is in trouble and that I should listen to God when he speaks. I never told her what he told me. I've known her for a lifetime. She says beautiful things but doesn't always live by them herself. He doesn't know that. He still pretends in front of people that we're okay, but we clearly aren't. He seems like a narcissist, but I'm not sure because I'm not an expert. I want to catch him out because he's the type of person who blames everyone else but himself. What should I do?